Every human being has a built-in system designed for movement, growth, and survival. But what separates those who remain stagnant from those who take powerful, consistent action is not just motivation. It's understanding how to engage your biology. When we talk about forcing yourself to take action, we're not talking about brute willpower alone. We're talking about learning how to leverage your neurobiology, the circuits in your brain and body that govern effort, focus, and momentum. Action creates feedback, and feedback creates confidence. When you deliberately place yourself in forward motion, especially when it's hard, you activate systems in the brain that sharpen your attention, increase dopamine, and build resilience. So even if you feel resistance, even if you don't feel ready, you can initiate action by triggering these biological levers. The key is learning how to override hesitation with deliberate steps, no matter how small, because those first steps are where transformation begins. People often believe that motivation must come first, that somehow, before they take the leap, they'll be filled with some wave of clarity or inspiration that will push them into action, but that's a misunderstanding of how the brain actually works. From a biological standpoint, motivation is not a prerequisite for action. It's a byproduct of it. Waiting for motivation is like waiting for your muscles to grow before you start exercising. The brain has evolved to reward movement, to reinforce behavior that pushes us toward goals, and to activate internal systems that create energy, focus, and drive after we begin, not before. That means the moment you take even a single step toward something, especially when it's hard or uncomfortable, you set off a chain reaction in the nervous system that increases the likelihood of continued effort. This isn't about pushing yourself recklessly. It's about understanding that the action itself flips the switch on key neuromodulators in the brain, particularly dopamine, which is critical for reinforcing behavior and sustaining pursuit. When you sit idle, thinking, overanalyzing, or waiting for the perfect emotional state, you're not feeding the system that creates motivation. You're starving it. Dopamine doesn't flood your system just because you think about doing something. It rises when you take a step, when you move your body, when you commit to the work, when you act despite resistance. That's when the internal chemistry begins to shift, and it doesn't have to be massive. In fact, the brain responds powerfully even to small actions as long as they're goal-directed. Something as simple as standing up, walking toward a task, opening a notebook, or beginning a workout creates a loop. Effort leads to a dopamine pulse, which increases your desire to stay engaged, and that desire reinforces your willingness to take the next step. That's why starting is everything. The longer you delay, the more you're reinforcing the opposite loop, a kind of learned inaction where hesitation becomes your default setting. There's something else at play here too. When you take action even imperfectly, you create evidence for your brain. You teach yourself neurologically that you are capable of doing hard things. That evidence stacks over time. It builds confidence not just mentally but biologically. Confidence is not some abstract feeling. It's a signal from the brain saying, you've done this before, you can do it again. But you only get access to that signal through repetition, through action. So when people ask, how do I get motivated? The answer isn't about searching for inspiration. It's about engaging the systems in the brain and body that are designed to be activated by movement. The frontal cortex, the basal ganglia, the midbrain. These are regions deeply involved in planning, effort, and reward. They don't come online when you sit still and hope. They come online when you push against resistance. That's the neurobiological truth, and the most effective way to tap into that system is to start with what's called a behavioral trigger, something you can physically do in the first 60 seconds of hesitation. Whether it's writing one sentence, doing one push-up, opening the project you've been avoiding, whatever the task, breaking the inertia creates momentum. It's important to understand that this isn't just psychological, it's chemical. The more you engage in this loop of effort followed by dopamine release, the more sensitive and efficient that system becomes. You train your brain to associate challenge with reward, and that association becomes the engine of long-term motivation. Eventually, you don't need to force yourself as much. The system starts to work for you. But to reach that state, you have to earn it, through repetition, through daily acts of initiation, through proving to your biology that you are not a passive observer of your life, but an active participant in shaping it. This is why people who succeed consistently are rarely the ones who feel the most ready. They're the ones who have trained themselves to move before they feel ready, because they understand that the chemistry follows the behavior, not the other way around. And the greatest breakthroughs don't come from waiting. They come from moving. Even slowly, even imperfectly, just move. Because action creates motivation, not the other way around. When it comes to taking action, most people focus entirely on what's happening in their mind, what they think, how they feel, what they're telling themselves. But what's often overlooked is how much your body, and specifically your visual system, plays a powerful role in whether you move forward or stay stuck. Your eyes aren't just passive receivers of information. They're directly wired into parts of the brain that control attention, energy, and readiness. In fact, the direction and focus of your gaze can either amplify your drive or shut it down completely. One of the most reliable ways to shift from a passive, hesitant state into a state of action is by adjusting your visual focus. When you look down or around aimlessly, your nervous system tends to enter a more relaxed or even distracted state. But when you direct your gaze forward, especially toward a distant point, you activate specific neural circuits that are involved in alertness and pursuit. That forward gaze is not just symbolic of forward movement. It's a biological signal to the brain that it's time to engage, to move towards something, to prepare for effort. This isn't about forcing positive thinking. It's about tapping into the hardwired link between vision and readiness. There are neural pathways that run directly from the eyes into the brainstem, particularly into areas responsible for initiating movement and sharpening focus. When your gaze is stabilized and directed toward a goal, even one as simple as a point on the wall or the horizon, your brain interprets that as a cue to shift into goal-seeking mode. And once that system turns on, everything begins to change. Your heart rate adjusts, your breathing shifts, and your mental clarity improves. It might sound small, but this is a tool you can use at any moment when you're feeling stuck. You can literally raise your eyes, fix your vision on something ahead of you, and begin to trigger the internal state necessary for forward action. It's not magic. It's not psychological trickery. It's physiology. When athletes are preparing to sprint, or soldiers are preparing for movement, or performers are gearing up for stage, there is a reason their eyes go forward. Their visual system is aligning with their motor system to prepare the body and brain for execution. This becomes especially important when you're facing resistance, the kind that tries to keep you inactive, uncertain, or fatigued. Instead of spiraling in thought, look forward, not metaphorically, literally. Sit upright, raise your chin slightly, pick a spot ahead of you, and lock your vision there. In doing so, you initiate a neurobiological cascade that sets the foundation for movement. It might sound too simple to matter, but it's exactly these subtle, controllable shifts that prime the brain for big outcomes. And there's a deeper layer to this. When you fix your gaze forward and commit to a task, even a hard one, your brain releases neuromodulators that increase your alertness and narrow your focus. That narrow focus, which is also called high acuity vision, is directly tied to the brain's pursuit systems, the same systems that animals use when hunting or navigating a complex environment. You're not just looking, you're locking in. And the brain interprets that as a sign that something important is about to happen. That level of importance is what stimulates engagement. It creates what's called a readiness potential in the motor cortex, a kind of electrical buildup that prepares the body for movement. In simple terms, your body starts gearing up before you even take the first step, just because your visual system has sent the right signal. The eyes say, "We're going somewhere," and the brain begins recruiting all the systems necessary to make that real. So when you're struggling to take action, don't start with a speech in your head. Start with your body, adjust your posture, align your gaze, Set your vision forward. This single change communicates to your entire nervous system that it's time to shift from stillness to motion, and once that shift begins, action becomes more likely. Focus becomes sharper. The resistance starts to weaken. You begin to create the internal conditions necessary for forward movement. That's the level of control we all have right now. Without waiting for motivation or clarity or the perfect mood, we can influence our state through something as primal and immediate as vision. And that's not abstract, that's powerful, because the first step to action isn't always thought, it's where you choose to place your eyes. When you control your gaze, you begin to control your mind, and when you control your mind, there's almost nothing you can't do. Most people chase dopamine without understanding how it actually works. They think dopamine is about pleasure or a feeling of success once the reward has already been achieved. But in truth, dopamine is much more complex and far more powerful than just a chemical that makes you feel good. It's the molecule of motivation, of drive, of pursuit. And here's the key: dopamine isn't primarily released when you hit the goal. It's released during effort, when you're in the process of moving forward, especially when that process is difficult or uncertain. The harder you push, the more the system engages, and that's exactly why effort, not outcome, is what truly trains the brain. You don't need to wait for some external success to trigger this system. You can earn dopamine through deliberate action, especially when that action requires you to overcome resistance. Every time you take a step forward while feeling stress, discomfort, or doubt, and you persist, your brain gets the message, this matters. And when it matters, your brain reinforces that behavior by releasing dopamine, strengthening the circuits that support motivation and resilience. There's something very important to understand here. Dopamine doesn't just reward you, it teaches you. It tells the brain, this is what we want more of. So if you link dopamine only to outcomes like money, recognition, or the end result, you're missing the chance to build a powerful internal system. But if you learn to attach dopamine to the process, the effort itself, you make yourself unstoppable. That's how high performers sustain motivation even when progress is slow or invisible. They've trained their brain to enjoy the climb, not just the summit, and this process becomes even more effective when you're aware of it. When you consciously say to yourself, this is hard, and I'm doing it anyway, you amplify the dopamine effect. You're creating what's called contingency, where effort becomes the trigger for reward. That reshapes your identity. You stop needing external validation because your brain is internally reinforcing the right behaviors. This is also how you become more resilient over time. If you only feel rewarded when something goes well, your motivation becomes fragile. It's dependent on conditions you can't fully control, but if you feel rewarded simply by leaning into effort, by pushing through discomfort, you're building a system that adapts under pressure. You train yourself to keep going when others quit because you've decoupled your drive from the outcome and recoupled it to action. That's a shift from outcome-based to process-based motivation. And that's the foundation of real grit. Now, it's important to recognize that this isn't something that happens once and sticks forever. It's something you train just like a muscle. Every time you engage in meaningful effort and tell yourself, this is good, this is progress, you're laying down stronger neural pathways. You're increasing your brain's sensitivity to dopamine in those circuits. And over time, effort begins to feel more natural, more automatic. You start to seek it, not because it's easy, but because you've rewired your system to understand that effort itself is a form of reward. This also changes the way you perceive challenge. Instead of seeing hard things as obstacles, you start to see them as opportunities to engage the system that drives growth. When something is difficult, you no longer interpret it as a threat to your progress. You interpret it as a signal that this is exactly where growth happens. That shift changes everything. You stop hesitating, you stop fearing discomfort, and you start showing up with a new kind of energy, the kind that's grounded in biology, not just emotion. So if you want to build lasting motivation, don't chase comfort, chase the process, lean into tasks that require effort, even if they don't produce immediate results. Train your mind to value friction, because every time you do, you're strengthening the dopamine system that governs drive, confidence, and long-term progress. You're teaching your brain that effort is not something to be avoided, it's something to be pursued. And that's when you stop relying on motivation and start generating it from within. The real win isn't in the outcome, it's in your ability to show up and push forward, especially when it's hard. That's when the brain starts working for you, not against you. That's how you create a mindset and a physiology that's built for long-term success. Stress is often framed as the enemy of growth, as something to be avoided, suppressed, or escaped, but that's not how the brain interprets it. In fact, the nervous system views stress in a very specific way, as a signal that something important is happening, something that demands adaptation. And if you can learn to work with stress, not run from it, you begin to tap into one of the most powerful mechanisms for personal transformation: neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to change itself in response to experience. Neuroplasticity is not something that turns on when you're calm, relaxed, and everything is easy. It's activated most strongly when you're operating in the zone between comfort and chaos, when you're stretching your abilities, pushing through resistance, and facing something uncertain. That's the biological window where the brain says, "This is new, this is hard, let's rewire so we can handle it better next time." And that rewiring process is how you grow, not just mentally, but physically, emotionally, and behaviorally. Now, this doesn't mean you need to throw yourself into overwhelming situations or seek out pain for its own sake. It means understanding the role of stress as a tool. The right kind of stress, moderate, intentional, and paired with effort, is exactly what teaches the brain to become more efficient, more focused, and more capable under pressure. When you encounter a challenge and you lean into it rather than avoid it, you're telling your brain, "This is worth paying attention to." That signal drives learning and long-term adaptation. What's fascinating is that this process isn't just psychological. It's chemical. When you enter a state of stress, like preparing for a difficult conversation, stepping into a new project, or pushing through a workout, your body releases adrenaline and cortisol. These hormones don't just make you feel tense, they prime the brain to encode new experiences. They heighten your awareness, increase your memory of the moment, and open the window for neural change, but that window doesn't stay open forever. It closes unless you pair it with action. You have to meet stress with effort if you want to translate discomfort into growth. This is why people who seek comfort all the time tend to stay stuck. They're not engaging the circuits necessary for change. They're not providing the brain with the kind of stimulus it needs to rewire. Growth doesn't come from staying safe. It comes from pushing the boundary just far enough that you feel it, but not so far that it breaks you. That's where you develop resilience, because resilience is not just a mindset. It's a set of neural adaptations that get stronger every time you step into controlled stress and navigate it with deliberate action. It's also important to understand that how you interpret stress affects its impact. If you see stress as a threat, it triggers fear circuits and shuts down learning. But if you frame it as a challenge, as a signal of importance, your brain processes it differently. It shifts from reactive mode to adaptive mode. And that framing is under your control. You don't have to believe the first story your brain tells you about stress. You can choose to see it as an opportunity. That choice matters because it dictates whether you shrink or expand in the face of discomfort. Think about any time you did something hard: public speaking, making a bold decision, stepping outside your routine. You likely felt your heart rate increase, your palms sweat, your thoughts speed up. That was your nervous system preparing you for action. But if you stepped forward anyway and followed through, your brain logged that experience as strength. You may not have felt stronger in the moment, but the neural change was already happening. Your capacity increased, even if only slightly. Do that consistently, and the brain begins to remodel itself. You become a different version of yourself, not because of what you hoped for, but because of what you endured and moved through. And here's where it all ties together: stress plus action equals adaptation. That's the equation. You can't eliminate stress from life, but you can choose how you engage with it. You can either let it consume you, or you can learn to work with it. And when you work with it, when you meet it head on, you unlock one of the most powerful levers for growth that your biology has to offer. Not by waiting for things to get easier, but by showing up again and again, even when it's hard. Because the brain doesn't change when you're comfortable, it changes when you're challenged and you decide to keep going.